Hi, I'm Rita. Welcome back to my booktube channel, Life Worth Reading. I haven't filmed a wrap-up since April because I hate filming wrap-ups. I love watching them, but I hate filming them. Like, I dread filming wrap-ups. And so I haven't done one since April. We're now in August. I have a few books to talk about. I have 16 books to talk about. Those are books that I read in May, June, and July. I have a lot to get through and I tend to talk a little bit too much during my wrap-up, so I'm going to try to do a speed run through these 16 books and tell you which ones I think are worth reading, which ones I think were duds. Some of these were kind of duds, and that's it. I have 16 books to talk about, so let's get started right away. In May, I had a very bad reading month. I only read 2 things and they were both actually for the Asian readathon that I tried to participate in, but I was in a huge reading slump, so it didn't really work. The first book that I read in May was Heaven by Mieko Kawakami, and this book, listen, a lot of people love this book. It's about these 2 teenagers, a boy and a girl. They are like in this prestigious school and they're both very bullied very badly for different reasons. The guy is because he has like this very prominent lazy eye, and the girl because she's like dirty, and all the other kids make fun of them. And so they kind of strike up this friendship, right, because they feel so lonely. And this was a really sad book, and it was one of those sad books that was like I didn't really see the point of it. A lot of people talk about the beautifulness of the writing. I didn't really connect with the writing. I didn't find it all that incredible, and it was just like one of those stories where you're like, these characters are suffering and suffering and suffering, and the bullying is so bad and they're so constantly beaten up, humiliated, and nobody helps them. Their family doesn't help them, and you're just kind of like, why am I reading this? Like, what's the purpose of me reading about these 2 children suffering this badly? Like, it didn't really feel like there was a lesson. It didn't really feel like there was like this higher purpose to the story. It was just like suffering and suffering and suffering and suffering. And I got to the end and I was like, what can I take from this story other than the sadness and the cruelty of these other children that are constantly beating them and humiliating them? Yeah, I didn't like it. I hate books that are just like suffering and suffering and you don't really see the purpose of it. I just didn't connect with it. I gave it 2 stars. It was one of those books that I was reading and I was like waiting for something either good to happen to them or for the message to be something, but I didn't really see the point of it. I probably missed out on the higher message of this book. If there was one, I didn't see it. It could have been like my wrong interpretation of the story. I just didn't connect with it. I didn't like it. It was just so depressing, and what for? Then the second book that I read for the Asian Readathon in May was Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. This is a book that has been very highly talked about in the last couple of years actually, and it's about our main character whose name I do not remember. I don't remember most of this main character's names, okay? It's been like 2 or 3 months, like I don't remember. But she is a worker at this convenience store for the last 30-something years. That's all she has ever done with her life, and she's very content with the position that she has, even though that society is constantly reminding her that she should be progressing with her life. She should be getting a better job, she should be getting a husband, children, and she doesn't really want any of that. And so it's just this story about her about the store, and I gave it like 3.5, 4 stars because even though there were a lot of things that I did really like about it, there were some things that I really didn't. So this main character is portrayed, in my opinion, as neurodivergent, right? Because she does not follow a lot of the social rules. She has difficulty interpreting and understanding other people's like social cues, and sometimes some of her behavior is like really violent. Not her behavior, like her actions, but like her thoughts. And I didn't quite understand that because I was like, why are we making this character that is clearly neurodivergent have such violent thoughts sometimes? It's just because someone is neurodivergent does not mean that they are violent in itself. Of course it can happen, but it felt a little bit off to me to have her have some of these thoughts. But other than that, she was a great person. Like, she never did anything wrong. It's just some of her thoughts are like little murderous, and I'm like, okay. And also, this has the most insufferable like side character that I've ever seen in my life. This other worker that comes to work at the convenience store is like one of the most insufferable characters that I've ever had to read through. And that was the purpose of him. Like, the purpose of this man was to be the most insufferable man you've ever read about. But it was still a bit too much for me. So it was a good story. I liked the ending, I liked the message, but it wasn't just like all that spectacular. Like, it was a 3.5 4-star read for me that I really enjoyed. Now, moving on to June. I read 5 books in June, and it was not a great reading month. Most of these are like 3 stars or less. I did a vlog of me reading library books and then me reading YA fantasy books also from the library, so I have those 2 vlogs. And most of these books just didn't really do it for me, so please do excuse all the 3-star reviews. Sometimes it happens. The first book that I read in June was The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang, which was not an average book at all. I gave it 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. Last year I tried reading The Poppy War and I stopped at like 60% because I wasn't connecting with it. I wasn't getting it. It wasn't the right timing for me to read the story. But now I tried it again and it was very, very good. Like, I get it. It wasn't the perfect 5-star for me, but I totally get it. It was incredibly well built. Like, R.F. Kuang does really have a talent for writing, for world building, for crafting a story, because this book was like packed to the brim with action, with characters, with violence, with war. It was just like a setup, but it was still like 5 books worth of action just in one. I have yet to continue the series. I have to read The Dragon Republic next, but I'm very excited because the first book like left on like a really openness, where like sometimes you finish the first book and you're like, you can kind of see where the book is headed in the second one. This time I couldn't tell. Like, the book finished and I was like, where could we possibly go from here? Like, we could go everywhere from here. So I really enjoyed it. It wasn't like my perfect series. I'm not the most crazy about adult fantasy yet, but it was a 4-star. Very good, very well crafted. R.F. Kuang truly is an amazing writer. Next up, I read Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk. I don't remember her name or how to pronounce her name. That's more like it. This is a book that won the Nobel Prize, and it's set in Poland, and it's in this like really isolated village in Poland. And we have our main character again, whose name I don't remember, and she's this elderly woman that really loves astrology, and so she's like kind of seen as a little bit of a lunatic. And she has these few neighbors, like very few neighbors, and one of them shows up dead, and you're trying to figure out like who killed him, why. And all of these people that are dying around her are very connected with hunting, and not animal cruelty per se. They don't torture animals for the sake of it, but like hunting or hurting animals either for consumption or for the fun of hunting. And so it kind of seems like the animals are actually taking revenge, and it seems like the ghosts of the animals are killing these men. And so it was a very interesting book. It did remind me of The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones, though it's a very different take on it. But I love the setting. The setting was very well done. Like, you could feel it, like you were in this isolated village in Poland. The mystery wasn't my favorite. The resolution to the mystery wasn't my favorite. But I loved following this such unique main character, like an elderly woman that no one takes seriously. And she proves herself to be worthy of being taken seriously. And she's a teacher, and I just really loved this different perspective. And so this book ended up being like a 3.5 as well. It wasn't perfect, but it's a book that I look back on and I can tell that I enjoyed it, and that I think it's worth a read. If you are interested in any of these aspects, it's definitely worth a read. It's a very interesting book, and I did like it. Next up, we have The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert. I hated this book. I gave it 2 stars. It was the most, not only typical YA fantasy ever, but it was also the most confusing YA fantasy ever. If you're interested, you should go watch my vlog where I read this 3 YA fantasy books. This was not a good one. I did not like it at all. Our main character was insufferable, and not for like a unhinged woman kind of thing. No, she was just a bitch, and she was just bad as a main character. The story was very not original at all, and it was just very confusing. I got to the later half and I was like, what the hell is going on? I do not understand a single thing of what's going on. Where are we? What are we doing here? How does this world work? None of it worked for me. 2 stars. Never reading from Melissa Albert again. Again, for that vlog, I then read Daughter of the Pirate King by Tristan Levenseller. This was a more interesting take on a YA fantasy. It's about our main character, whose name I also do not remember, and she's the daughter of the Pirate King. So there's this pirate that controls everything, and she's his daughter, also a pirate, and she's like this badass, unhinged girl that like she kills men. Ooh. And she is taken hostage on this boat by this very handsome captain, but it's all a ruse. Like, she wanted to get kidnapped on purpose so her father could come rescue her and then steal some treasure map. It started interesting, like the first 100 pages, like, ooh, I was hooked, but the more I read, the more bland it became, the more typical it became. And yeah, I didn't really buy the romance. I didn't really love the like action in it, the plot, I guess. It does have a sequel. It's a duology. I might read the second one because I gave this book 3 stars. It was enjoyable, it just wasn't all that. So I might read the sequel. I probably won't, but I might because it has better reviews than the first one. So I'm open to it, but it wasn't my favorite. Then the success of that vlog was Ace of Shades by Amanda Foody. I really loved this book. It wasn't, again, it wasn't like a 5-star read for me. It was a sort of the Sin City game, Shadow Game, something like that. I don't remember what the trilogy is called, but I'm very excited to keep going. I loved our main characters. Again, I didn't buy their romance because you know that romance is, it's bound to happen. I found some of the history a little bit confusing because it's about this girl that comes from a very privileged town where she is like towards the middle, like lower class, but the place itself is very privileged, and her mother goes a lot to this like Sin City. I don't remember the name of it right now, which is really stupid of me, but it's like this Las Vegas on crack. Okay, and she goes there a lot, and she's like, if I don't come back in 3 months, I'm dead. And so her daughter comes to look for her in that city, and she gets involved with like all these gang members and like mafia, and there are these magic and talents, and I didn't really understand some of it. I'm still waiting for them to read the next books to like understand a few things, but it was very fun. I'm excited to read the sequels, and it was a very original YA fantasy, which I can definitely appreciate after reading the other 2. Then I read a memoir that is called Tastes Like War by Grace M. Cho. It's a book, a memoir about our author, Grace M. Cho, and she is a Korean immigrant that grew up in the 70s and 60s in a very small white town in America. And so it's about the racism that they suffered, and honestly also about her mom, mostly because her mom was taken during the Korean War. She married her American father, and she married an American man that was there for the Korean War in the 50s, and so she's taken to America, and it's about her adjustment to America, and it's also about how later on in her life she became schizophrenic, which is very unusual for women, in like older women, to become schizophrenic, but it happened to her mom. And it's about her disease. It's about how her daughter, the author, dealt with it. And I love some of the aspects of this memoir. I love the relation to food, how to adapt to such a different country with such a different culture where you feel like you're not welcomed. It's definitely an interesting memoir. I give it 3.5 stars. There were some things that I didn't really like about it, and there are also some controversies attached to it, but other than that, it was a very interesting story and a very sad story about this woman that just felt out of place her whole life, and how she suffered so much throughout the end of her life, and how the like medical and justice system did not help her at all with her mental illness. And it was very sad. Oh my god, my battery light is flashing. Shit. Okay, clearly I'm gonna have to keep going after I charge my battery, so I'll see you later. Okay, I'm back. My battery is fully charged. I'm hoping that the angle isn't too different. I tried my hardest for it to be very similar, but I hope that it is. Moving on to the next book, Red at the Bone by Jacqueline Woodson. I really love this book. I gave it 4.5 stars. The writing was beautiful. It's a short intergenerational story, and I thought it was very powerful. I loved the writing. I loved the story itself, the relationships between the characters. I really enjoyed this one. It's not, maybe if it was a bit bigger, it would have been even more memorable because it would have been even more fleshed out, but I found that it was very fleshed out for the way that it's so short. It was very fleshed out. I really enjoyed this one. I'm very glad that I waited until I had a physical copy of myself to read. I don't know if Jacqueline Woodson has published anything else, but if she has, I'm definitely reading it because the writing of this was beautiful. Okay, only 7 more books to talk about. The next one that I read was for Summerween. We are getting to the Summerween books for July. I filmed a Summerween vlog, but I was editing it and I really didn't like it, so I never uploaded it. So here are the books that I read for Summerween. The first one was Fever Dream by Samantha Schweblin, which is a novella about... I don't know if I should tell you what it is about. It has to do with being sick, with worms, illnesses. It's about a main character that wakes up and she is in the company of someone, and it's like this dialogue where, oh my god, I just remembered that I'm not wearing the jacket I was wearing. Whatever, it's fine. And it's about her trying to figure out what happened to her. And I gave it 3 stars. It's not really worth a rating. It's like, it has this very general uneasiness to it. It's not scary, it's not horror, but it has like this very general uneasiness with it, and I read it like in one sitting because I was very intrigued by it. Actually reading the author's note and reading what it's based on, it was very interesting, and I loved knowing what it's about. So because of that, I think it's worth a read. But it's not horror, it's not the best thing that I've ever read. It was just, oh my god, what is my hair doing? Sir, what are my bangs doing? Anyway, it's not the best thing that I've ever read. It was fine. It was a good horror novella, but I was waiting for something a little bit more scary. Next up, also for Summerween, I read In My Dreams I Hold a Knife by Ashley Winstead. This is a thriller book that was really talked about last year. It was a lot of people's like favorite thriller of the year, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I give it 4 stars. I thought it was a great thriller. Not perfect thriller. I didn't love the resolution, the like who did it, but the whole plot, and there were some parts that were like, can we move this along now, because it's about our main character Jessica, and about this very tight group of friends, 7 friends in college, and they're all very different, and they're all like this American gods in this university, right? And one of them is brutally murdered. One of them is accused of it, but never actually like prosecuted and sentenced. And so he's let go, and they all like stop talking to each other, and now it's their 10-year high school reunion, and they are all coming back, and they are all faced with what actually happened that night and trying to figure out who murdered their friend. I loved the romance. I loved these untouchable, very classic American university experience. I loved reading about it, but there were some parts that I was like, okay, let's get back to the actual like thriller shit, okay? Like, I'm tired of hearing about football. I'm tired of hearing about floats, Thanksgiving. I don't want to hear about that. Give me the murder. And also, like I said, I didn't love who actually did it, but I had fun, and that's all I can really ask of a thriller. I had lots of fun reading this one, and I am excited for the next thriller that Ashley Winsett puts out this year. I don't know if it's out yet. It's called Our Wives something. It's about wives. I will be reading it because this was really great. Then I also read Comfort Me with Apples by Catherine M. Valente. This is a shorter, even shorter novella. I don't know why people categorize this as horror. This is not a horror novella. It's like a little bit of a mystery. It's about our main character, something that lives in this very perfect white neighborhood with her husband, who she really, really loves. And she's always saying, like, I was made for him. We are meant to be. And then she starts unraveling the secrets of this neighborhood. I thought the idea behind it was clever. When you do figure out what's happening, you're like, oh, okay, this is different. But it left me with a lot of questions that obviously weren't answered because this is a novella, and there were like no horror aspects, in my humble opinion. I was not scared, I was not uneased even, I was just intrigued to figure out what's happening. But I read this for a scare, right? I read this for a good old fright, and I didn't get that. It's not horror at all. And other than that, it was like fine. If you want to read it, if you want to not waste but like spend an hour of your time reading this, I think it's worth it. But don't go in expecting the most incredible thing you've ever read or a horror novella, because it is not. We are down to the last 4 books, so let's do this. Next up, I read the book of Essie by Megan McLean Weir. This is a book that I picked up very randomly from my library. I had never heard of it, and it's about our main character Essie, or Esther, and she lives in this small town. I forgot the state they're in, it doesn't really matter. And she's part of this big family, and her dad is this famous preacher, and they have like this reality show about them, like TLC kind of thing. And Esther gets pregnant at 17, and they're trying to hide it from the reality show because obviously it's very, very bad publicity, and they're very pro-life, so she can't really get an abortion, and she doesn't really want one. And then also she can't actually be pregnant because she's underage, and the whole no sex before marriage thing. And at first it's a very fresh take on reality TV shows about religion, about people putting up a facade that's not actually true. It gets dark. It gets really, really dark. And Essie, her grand plan is to marry someone, and she chooses Rourke, that is another boy in her high school that's having very big financial trouble. His family is very in danger of closing down their shop, of losing all their money, and so she picks him to get married. And so they are doing this very rushed wedding, and her plan is to marry this guy so she can escape her family. Yeah, it gets really dark. It has another perspective of this woman named Liberty, and she was part of this cult, and after something happens with this cult and she becomes a journalist, and so we also have her perspective. I didn't love her perspective. I would rather we just hear from Essie and Rourke, but it was very interesting. Like, it was very original. I had never heard or read anything like this before, but it got really, really dark, and I didn't love the resolution of the story. Towards the end, it was very rushed, the way everything was wrapped up, so I didn't love it. But I still give it 4 stars because it was just very original, and I love a good never before read story. There were some comments in it, because it was written by a white woman, there were some things in the middle of it that I was like, this kind of could be considered a little bit problematic, but I just liked how original it was, and I liked the reality TV elements of it. I liked how real the characters felt, which is unusual for a debut author. And yeah, it was a great time. If you've never heard of it, I would consider giving it a try. Next up, I read The Four Winds by Kristen Hanna. I didn't like this book. I gave it 2.5 stars. It was, again, kind of like Heaven. Tragedy upon tragedy upon tragedy upon tragedy, and what for? You know? It was very repetitive. It's a giant book. It's like 400 pages of just Dust Bowl, depression, no money, no water, people just suffering everywhere. And it was just like tragedy upon tragedy upon tragedy, and I didn't love the ending. I will say that. It was very predictable, and it was kind of stupid in my opinion. I didn't connect with it. It was a book that was just very, very repetitive. It was my first Kristen Hanna book. I'm not gonna let it detour my goal to read other Kristen Hanna books, but I didn't really like it. I don't think it's worth a read. I thought it was just depressing, and what for? You know, I like learning about some historical fact that I really know about the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl, but not a great time. And we are down to the last two books. The second one, the next one that I read was So Happy For You by Celia Lasky. This is a thrill book that has really been ruffling some feathers around booktube, alright? Some people hate this book, some people love this book. I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. I thought it was fun. I like a fun thriller. I do. It's about a main character, Robin, I think. And she is the maid of honor for her best friend, and we are in this society that has increasingly weirder rituals around weddings, okay? And weddings can get a little creepy. And our main character, Robin, is a very interesting character to follow. You probably won't like her. I didn't dislike her. I thought it was an interesting perspective to follow. And she is this gay woman that has been in a long-term relationship that does not want to get married because of all the societal pressures around it, the societal role of brides, and she thinks that weddings are just a way for the government to keep tabs on you. So she does not want to get married. She has very strong opinions about a lot of stuff. And so when her best friend decides to get married, she's like this very wedding obsessed person, and it gets creepy, okay? But it's not as crazy as I wanted. As you can probably tell, I'm going to say it again, I didn't love the ending of this book. Endings of books are tricky for me. Okay, it's rare for me to actually like really like the way a story ends, and I didn't really love the way the story ended. I was hoping for something a little bit even more dark, something even scarier, something even more crazy than what actually happened. So I didn't love it, but I still gave it like 4 stars because it was a fun audiobook to listen to. I spent a whole afternoon listening to it and I had a great time. So that's all I can really ask sometimes of a thriller. Sometimes thrillers don't have to be the serious best thriller I've ever read. Sometimes it can be just fun, you know? And on to the last book that I'm going to talk about, and the last book that I read in July, and also another very, very fun thriller that I listened to on audiobook, and it's One of the Girls by Lucy Clark. Apparently Lucy Clark is a very prolific British thriller writer. I had never read anything from her before, but I am now very interested in reading her backlist because this is her latest novel, and it's about a wedding party again, and it's about their like bridesmaids weekend in Greece, and on this like isolated village. And I had very different expectations going in, so I will say it's a very slow thriller, okay? Someone dies at the end of the weekend, and so I was expecting it to happen right away and being like a whodunit thriller. It's not that, okay? You know from the beginning that someone has died after this 3-day party that they're having, but honestly the thriller is more of trying to figure out who will die, why, and you can cover secrets about all of them. And that was honestly my favorite part. It's a very slow thriller. Like I mentioned, it was a very cool audiobook experience. All of them have very different personalities, so that was very distinct, which I liked. And it shows like a skilled writer when you can write 6 different women that are actually very different, and uncovering all of their secrets and the way that they tie to each other. It was like I was into it. And the ending I did not see coming from the beginning of the book. Like as you reach the ending you can tell what's going to happen, but from the beginning I had no idea what the hell was going to happen. If you're expecting like someone dies first and then a whodunit, don't read this one. But if you don't mind like a slow unraveling of a thriller and just uncovering secrets that are not actually all that dark, like they're more like juicy secrets that you're uncovering, then you're really going to enjoy this book. And I will be reading more from Lucy Clark because I really enjoyed this one, so I would highly recommend. Alright, and those were the 16 books that I've read since May. I'm going to try to do wrap-ups more frequently so they aren't so long, but I dread filming wrap-ups. And from what I can tell from other booktubers, I feel like we all kind of dread wrap-ups. Is that true? Let me know if it's just me, but yeah. I am having a great reading year. Obviously there are some duds in between, but I'm really enjoying what I'm reading. July especially was a very good reading month for me, and hopefully August will be too, and for you as well. As always, if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more bookish content, and I'll see you in my next video. I hope you have a nice day, and always remember that life is worth reading.